All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. We are live. Do you guys hear us? Alexander from London. Peter, close to me in Moscow. Do you guys hear us? If you do, just drop us a quick line on the chat and let us know that you hear us okay. Alexander, Peter, do you guys want to say hi to make sure everyone hears you?
Yes, hello, everybody.
Good to be with you on this Sunday evening in Moscow.
All right, everyone looks like they hear us. Great. AJ says we hear you fine. Thomas Boyd says yes. Alexander says we hear you. Great. Courtney says hi, guys. Good day, gentlemen. Hello from Turkey. Hello from Australia. Hi from Athens. Brilliant channel. Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on what is our 6th live with the Duran. I have with me host of RT's Crosstalk and in Moscow, Peter Lavelle. And I have live from London, the Duran editor-in-chief, Alexander Mercouris, and I'm Alex Christoforou, and today I'm also broadcasting out of Moscow. Guys, welcome to the live chat. We appreciate everyone joining us. Remember, guys, you can always send us a super chat. We really appreciate it, and we will try to answer those super chats as well as any other questions that you have for us on the chat. Also visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, help support us, and you can also donate to our PayPal page and our Patreon page so we can continue to do broadcasts, the recorded ones and these live ones as well. We really, really appreciate your support. And we also have, I think, the dogs joining us as well.
We certainly do. We certainly do. Oh, there we go.
All right. So you want to give an introduction, Alexander and Peter?
Well,
to our other guests.
Look, let sleeping dogs lie. Mine are down, and I'm gonna stay down. Okay.
All right, Alexander. Before we get started, do you want to answer the question of? I forgot the video that it was where there was. Everyone thought it was a bird that was flying by the camera.
Yeah, it was one of my dogs. It was actually Mishkin. See if I can get him to. No, he's fast asleep. But it was one of my dogs actually flitting by, looking. He was sitting at my feet. He got very excited at that point, and a funny camera angle made it look like a bird. But he wasn't a bird at all. It was a white golden retriever, of which I have 2.
Mystery solved.
All right, mystery solved. So there it is. It was a dog, Mishkin. All right, we had 2. What we were talking about before we got in the live chat, there were 2 very big stories pretty much sucking up all the oxygen from the news cycle this week. Obviously, the first one was Brett Kavanaugh and the hearings that took place in front of the Senate committee. And the other one was the United Nations General Assembly, and more specifically, Trump's speech in front of the UNGA. But before we get to those big stories, and of course, any other questions that you guys have, let's kick it off with a couple of questions on Iran. Specifically, there's some questions on whether Trump will go to war with Iran, if Trump even wants to go to war with Iran, if the war hawks are pushing him towards war with Iran. Peter, we did a video on this, so we touched upon this in relation to the UN General Assembly speech. What do you think on Trump, Iran, and the rhetoric?
I think at this point in Trump's mind, it's more of a tactic that's part of maybe a strategy. The people around him have the strategy. I'm not convinced he's embraced it. And he's certainly willing to throw that circle bones left and right, very rhetorically. But, words have consequences, unfortunately, for people on the receiving end of force. I don't see it happening anytime soon. I think that Trump is showing that he's going to ratchet up the tensions. That makes people like John Bolton and Pompeo and the Israelis, Nikki Haley, all happy. Will he go beyond that? One thing I keep stressing here, I think Trump in his own mind is keeping a promise. He's not going to start any new wars under his watch. It doesn't mean he's going to end the ones on his watch. And I think he's aware of that. We've remarkably, Turkey and Russia made that deal surrounding Idlib without, I stress, without the United States. And that's with a NATO member. This is uncharted waters here. So I think that Trump is going to keep up the tensions. We have November coming up. the deadline for everyone to stop trading with Iran, which isn't going to happen. We're going to get a lot of fireworks about that. We already have the Europeans working with the Russians and the Chinese. You know, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, the more they try to isolate Russia, China, and Iran, the more they come together. Turkey is also not going to follow this embargo. So Trump faces a loss of face because this policy wasn't thought out very well. There's so many different angles to all of this, but to finish off on Iran, let's all be worried, but I don't think he's going to make any dramatic step, as much as people around him would like. He's got his wall to build, okay? He's got to fill the Supreme Court. He's got his agenda at home. And I know we'll go back to the General Assembly speech, but he's obviously not interested in foreign policy by listening to what he had to say.
Alexander, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely right. I agree with what Peter said. I'll just add one point, which is at the moment, the whole trend of US policy is not to attack Iran. It is trying to provoke, to instigate a popular revolution in Iran by squeezing Iran economically. And like Peter, I don't think that's going to work. I think that's based on a complete misunderstanding of Iranian society. And of course, it is coming to be very strongly resisted by more and more countries, and not just, as Peter said, countries like Russia and China, which are adversaries of the US, but countries like Turkey and Germany and India, which are friends of the US. So I don't think it's going to work. But for the moment, I don't think there's any agenda to start a military campaign against Iran. I think the US military would be horrified at such an idea. And I think the real point of danger will come in a year or so when it starts to become clear that this policy of strangling Iran economically and forcing regime change there that way is not working. Now, what will happen then, I don't know. But on balance, I still personally think that it is unlikely that the US will actually launch a military attack on Iran. I think the risks of doing so are just so enormous, politically and militarily.
Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right. The Pentagon loves threats, but they don't love wars, okay? Because threats get their budget ballooned. They get more money. They don't actually want to go fight them, okay? And certainly not against Iran. The law of unintended consequences is difficult to comprehend how Iran could react asymmetrically, and it would be devastating, and the military knows it.
Yeah.
All right, from Murat, I believe in Turkey, has a question. Alexander, can you comment a bit on Erdogan's meeting with Merkel?
Right. Well, I think this is a very interesting situation because, of course, my impression of Merkel and Erdogan is that they don't like each other, but at the same time, they find repeatedly that they have to work with each other. They both agree on the whole Iranian situation, which we were talking about just now. They both agree on the question of gas from Russia, and apparently they both said this to Trump separately. They disagree about many other things, and I think that it's impossible to see how Erdogan and Merkel, two such diametrically opposite people, could find much personal common ground between them. What is driving them together is the nature of US policy. And here we have the extraordinary paradox. Turkey has the biggest army after the United States in NATO. Germany has the biggest economy after the United States in NATO. Both of these two crucial NATO allies are being forced to talk with each other and are increasingly aligning with Russia because of US policy. And that really seems a very strange thing to do.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, we have from Christian Soldier a question before we started the chat, Peter, and this one goes to you, is why won't Trump release the FISA docs?
Most likely, the documents that he was presented are so intermingled with other intelligence, and maybe it was done intentionally. Look, just as I'm pretty sure that the White House legal staff was able to see these FISA documents, and the DOJ is saying, you see this one and you see this one and this one. Well, they're compromising our foreign policy with our allies, and that means the UK first and foremost. I wouldn't be surprised if it include other NATO countries in the Baltics, probably Israel, probably Saudi Arabia. Those documents show where the real meddling is, and so Trump is taking a step back. I think he makes a mistake because it wasn't his administration. It wasn't his DOJ. And since when is Trump trying to make friends around the world? I think he made a mistake. I think he should have released it because then you'll find out this whole investigation is a ruse. Based on those FISA warrants, you'll find out the whole thing is a ruse. It was circular. Is that the DOJ leaked to media? Media is used as a piece of evidence to put into the FISA warrant. It's as simple as that. It's circular, okay? It was intentional to do that. We know that as much from the Peter Strzok and Lisa Page exchanges. So we know that as much as that. I think Trump is being very much tempered by his, I think, at the end of the day, Trump has a huge HR problem. I mean, he's surrounded people that are not supporting his agenda. I'm not saying I support all of it, okay? But I'm saying he doesn't have the real nuts and bolts of loyalty around him. His people are not protecting the president. They're protecting the deep state. That's what's happening here, and that's why Trump took a step back. I think he made a mistake. He has the power to do it as the chief executive. He can release any document. He can release everything related to Roswell, to JF Kennedy, if he wants. Okay, he has the power to do that.
Can I just say, I agree with everything Peter said, but I would remind people of a program that Alex Christoforou and I did, in which we also said, and it's been confirmed here in Britain, that part of the reason Trump didn't agree to release these papers is because of very heavy lobbying by the British government, whose fingerprints are all over this business, all over the whole Russiagate business. So much of what happened has its origins here in Britain. And if we're talking about the FISA warrants, the key document that was used in the FISA warrants, we now know, is this extraordinary dossier compiled by Christopher Steele, a British citizen and a former MI6 agent. I suspect that the British told the United States that if Trump simply declassified these documents, Britain would reduce its intelligence cooperation with the US. And this was packaged to weigh on Donald Trump. Yeah. Can I just say that's a completely empty threat? It's a total bluff. The United States doesn't need British intelligence. I mean, any idea that it does is nonsense. But an inexperienced president might not have realized that.
We have to point out to our viewers here is that with the Five Eyes countries of gathering intelligence, English-speaking countries, is that each one of these countries are essentially at least paying lip service to not to spy on their own citizens. But you can have one member of the Five Eyes. They can do it, okay, and it would be considered benign and still above the law. So that's a way they get around it, okay? And it's a devious way. On paper, it's legal. Certainly, we know that the intentions were not for any national security reason. It was basically the deep state plotting against the presidential candidate and later a president of the United States. This is the biggest political scandal in American history. But you wouldn't know it if you're watching CNN and BBC and all the other clowns.
Can I just illustrate what Peter said? I mean, George Papadopoulos, this Trump aide, who is a US citizen, I have no doubt at all about this. He was being spied on electronically and otherwise in Britain by British intelligence, I am sure in cooperation with and at the request of the US intelligence services. Now, it would have been against the law for the US to spy on him without a FISA warrant. So they got the British to do it instead. And that goes on all the time.
And that's the evidence for the FISA warrant, okay?
Exactly.
See how it works. And you look at George Papadopoulos, he was It was brought to the UK. It was all paid for, and he was like a pawn on a chessboard. Now you're going to go meet Mr. Bishop. Now you're going to meet Miss Queen. Now you're going to meet another pawn, and then the FISA. Well, he met with this person and this person, but he was led by the nose.
Exactly.
And it creates this false sense that he's some kind of operative. Okay.
Exactly.
I mean, he was absolutely used. Carter Page was absolutely used. I just hope that Carter Page and Mr. Papadopoulos, they get good lawyers and they can retire for the rest of their life, because they can sue for this kind of defamation. This is a major breach of American law. And I hope the British have egg on their face when this all comes out.
All right, we got a super chat from Mr. Furkas. Thank you. 10 euro super chat. Alexander, what can Putin do to avenge the Israeli attack in Syria that led to the death of 15 Russian soldiers?
Right. I think in Putin's mind, revenge plays absolutely no role whatsoever. That this is not the way the Russians work, and it's certainly not the way Putin works. What he is going to do is something quite different, which is he's going to take steps to protect Russian personnel in Syria, and he's also going to take steps to advance Russia's political and military objectives in Syria. And he's made very clear what those are. He's supplied these advanced S-300 missiles to the Syrians. He's going to set up electronic warfare systems in Syria to make further attacks upon the Russian military in Syria more difficult, and he's going to forge further military and political links with those countries in the region, such as Iran, and Syria, of course, itself, with which Russia is working at the moment, and he's going to cooperate further with Turkey. That is the way the Russians work. It's not the way the United States works. The United States always looks for revenge in these situations, and that is why the US gets into the messes that it does.
That's right.
Russia doesn't work like that.
It's very interesting. Just to kind of pull the thread further from what Alexander Mercouris had to say. Before the announcement of the S-300s, what did the Russian side say? Almost nothing.
Mm.
See, this is the difference. The US will beat its chest, make threats and warnings, and they build up the media campaign, and the drum roll comes up, but the Russians just say very little, and they do. When they made that announcement, that created such a footprint, a political footprint, that caught everybody flat-footed, okay? That's the difference between the two, all right? Because the Russian side doesn't really use soft power in that sense, because it doesn't see the value in it. And as Alexander Mercouris says, the US gets itself into more trouble. When it looks for revenge, it gets blowback. It's common sense, okay? With the Russians, now they put the Israelis put them on the spot. They're not going to say that we're angry and we're going to go after you and we're going to take you to the court. No, the Russians say, we're just going to make sure it doesn't happen again. Okay? And you don't have a say in it. You don't have a say in it. It's a huge slap in the face of Bibi Netanyahu.
Peter, to stay with you, there's a question. Why does Israel and Saudi Arabia hate Iran so much? Why do they want to obliterate it?
Well, no. Well, there's many different ways you can answer that question here. First of all, you have this Wahhabi regime, a fanatical Islamic regime in Saudi Arabia. And just for religious reasons that go way, way back, the Shia are seen as heretics in the eyes of the Sunni. Now, the Israelis, well, they're just perfect opportunists, okay? Saddam was the next Hitler. Gaddafi is the next Hitler. Okay, they go through that, okay, and then they finally try to get the United States to go after their enemy, Iran. I mean, Iran gives Israel a reason to exist. I mean, they love having this kind of enemy, particularly if somebody else is going to do the fighting, meaning the Americans, okay? And the Saudis are doing it perfectly for opportunistic reasons too. I mean, they see. I think us and most of our viewers, when you say the Middle East, what happens? You probably get a visual image in your head. You see a country, Iraq, you see Jordan, you see Israel, you see Turkey, you see occupied Golan Heights, you see the West Bank, you see Gaza. The Saudis just see, they're Shia and we're Sunni. That's what they see, okay? And that's their worldview. And the Israelis are more than happy to prod on the Saudis in their hatred of Iran. And also, the Saudis hate the fact that is so patently obvious that no one ever wants to say it, is that the Islamic Republic of Iran, they have elections. Women drive cars. Women are members of parliament. They have a functioning democracy, something the Saudis could never comprehend or allow to happen, because if they did, it would be the end of the House of Saud, okay? They don't like this example in the region that works well enough, has a lot of problems, okay? Who doesn't, okay? They hate that Islam can present itself in that form. It's very important to see the difference.
All right, we got, let's see, Shirley Vick has a comment, which I'm going to read to both of you guys and everyone here. My husband is now watching Joanne Reed, and I'm here watching real journalists. All right.
Cool. Send her a t-shirt. Send her a t-shirt.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Shirley. Guys, yes, DRN shop to buy a t-shirt and support us. Send us your super chats, guys, so we can answer those. And you help support us at the same time so we can continue to broadcast. There was a question before we got on the live, and it was pretty much how do you move beyond Crimea and Syria in regards to U.S.-Russia relations? Alexander, how do you move beyond these two flashpoints to better the U.S. and Russia relations?
I think the answer to that has to be found in the United States, because they've got to understand two fundamental facts. Firstly, Crimea is a done thing. There is no way that Crimea is ever going to be separated from Russia again. And Syria is also, to all intents and purposes, a done thing. The regime change experiment in Syria has failed, and failed catastrophically. So you cannot reverse these two things. The United States has to accept that. It has to also, I think, calculate to itself whether it wants to make US-Russian relations hostage to these two issues, which it can never change. And it must try and move on and put this all behind it and say to itself, well, we lost in Crimea, we lost in Syria. Neither of these are essential to the vital interests of the United States. Having a good relationship with Moscow, the one country that can destroy the United States in an afternoon, is, and we should put these things behind us and move on. Doesn't mean we have to agree with what the Russians did in Crimea. Doesn't mean we have to agree with what the Russians did in Syria. But you put it behind you and you move on in your own interest.
You know, I think a lot of our viewers don't know this, but it's an important point. After the Second World War and the Yalta environment that was created, essentially what the West did is they said that there are Soviet armies in Eastern Europe and we can't get them out. And you're going to have to accept it or have World War III, okay? Take this on board. During the Second World War, the three Baltic republics became part of the Soviet Union. Now, I didn't say how they did because that's not the point. But the West never recognized the incorporation of the Baltic republics in the Soviet Union. But they still had a relationship. They traded, they had arms control agreements. They did not recognize those three republics as part of the constituent part of the Soviet Union. It was living as if. And this is what they're going to have to do when it comes to like Crimea. Alexander Mercouris is right. It's a done deal. I mean, you're not going to get any conversation. There's no deal that can be be made. Okay, none. It's like the Indians saying, when are you giving us back Long Island? Okay, it's the same thing. And as far as Syria, I think Trump had the right instincts and he was just hemmed in. I think in his mind, to better relations with Russia as he was coming into the Oval Office, is that why don't we have an international conference and finally settle this war in Syria? And that way you could kickstart the US-Russia relationship, but he wasn't allowed to do that. So the US should get on the right side of history and maybe be part of a positive end to the Syrian war. But, you know, illegally stationing over 2,000 troops there. For what reason is never been explained. Oh, that's to make sure that ISIS doesn't come back. The longer you stay there, the longer ISIS will be there. Wake up, somebody in Washington. You got your sense of causality upside down. There's, I don't think there's in the near and intermediate future, there's no even really any reason to talk about improved U.S.-Russia relations. It's just not going to happen.
I agree with that, actually.
All right, closing in on 500 viewers. That was fast. We got a super chat, 10 pounds from Afterglow. Alexander, how long can May and Merkel last?
Well, I made a prediction a few days ago on one of our programs that I thought Merkel would probably be out by the new year. I stand by that. I mean, she's been an extraordinary survivor, but I have a lot of contacts with Germany, and the disenchantment with Merkel in Germany amongst ordinary Germans is so strong, and it is now starting to feed in to her own CDU party, which has up to now been her major fortress. So I don't really think she can hang on for very much longer. The problem with Merkel is that, as I said, there's nobody obvious to take over from her.
That's a good point.
Theresa May, I'm sorry to say, is this unending car crash. I mean, she is quite possibly the single most incompetent prime minister Britain has had that I can remember.
Alex, are you going to go to the Brexit party? What is she talking about?
I mean, I've given up. I have given up. I just cannot explain. I cannot explain why she is still there. If you read the British media, there and you can bring yourself to read the Daily Telegraph, something I unfortunately have to do for my work. Reading the British media is not fun. You will find an article by a man there called Tim Montgomery, who is a very prominent Conservative official. And he makes exactly the same point, that Theresa May is just an impossible leader to expect anything from. And yet she is still there. I truly don't understand why. I cannot believe that the Conservatives are unable to find anybody, and are seriously thinking of Boris Johnson.
There's only one reason why I can think of why there isn't an internal coup in the Conservative Party, because Brexit is such a mess. And it's going to get more of a mess. They're going to let it stick to her. It'll be her mess, and then they'll say, well, you know, she's gone, okay? And well, history's been made. We have to move forward. I think really what it is they just want to dump it on her. She will be the Brexit failure for the end of time. I think that's the only compelling reason I can think of.
Absolutely right in all respects, Peter. But what a disastrous approach that is.
Well, that's politics.
Why is Brexit a mess? Because they left Theresa May to run it. I mean, you know, this is they created the situation. So she made a mess of it. So you're going to let her make an even bigger mess of it. I mean, but there we go. As you said, as Peter says, that's politics.
All right, Peter. Michael Karmoff is sending this question 3-4 times, and this is probably to your previous comment on Iran. And the question is, why would you think that Israel needs an enemy to exist? I don't think that is what you exactly said, but do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. What I'm saying is that, look, there's been Israel has had no existential threat to it since 1973. All right, I think everybody knows that. Okay, what it tries to do is to try to create political facts in the Middle East to keep it unstable and very much divided. That's why it likes this Shia-Sunni divide, because they're fighting among themselves. Israel, no one threatens Israel. Okay, Israel unfortunately threatens its neighbors. Okay, ask Syria. Okay, what, they've been bombed 200 times in the last 18 months. Okay, Syria isn't bombing Israel or outside of its borders. What I'm saying is, I'm glad the viewer asked me about that, and I will recalibrate it. It finds countries like Israel finds countries like Iran useful, because what it does, you know, when we think of, you know, the Arab-Israeli conflict, well, no, there's like 15 different conflicts going on at the same time, and Israel isn't in all of them, okay? But Israel does like to have that happen. I mean, Israel could have easily said what a high Trump administration official said, what now a month ago, is that we're there to create quagmires. Well, that's Israeli foreign policy in the Middle East. It wants quagmires for everybody else.
All right, let's go to another question before the live chat, and let's switch gears completely and go to what else but Kavanaugh. And Peter, this is
I don't know.
this is your will. I don't know.
No!
Here we go from Antonia Kinsley. The role of Western women post-populism. What do you think, Peter? The criticism of Ford, Alyssa Milano, who was at the hearing. I don't know why. Feminists, insufficient numbers of babies being born. How do you wake up conservative women? And how do you stop demonizing men? This is kind of a pretty big question, but
I mean, but the question gets to the core of what's so wrong, what's going on right now. This demonization and the destruction of Kavanaugh's character does not help women at all. At all. It doesn't. What it creates is intense distrust where there is already intense distrust. I cannot see how this furthers the advancement of women whatsoever. Ford, I don't know if this happened to her, but given her testimony, I think something happened to her sometime in her life. I mean, how does a psychology professor talk like a 5-year-old? Okay, you know, I try to have empathy for her, but I don't believe the event happened based on the facts that have been presented to me. We're told to believe the woman. Well, no, believe in facts. That's what you can believe in. That's why we have the rule of law. The rule of law applies to everyone, no matter what your status is in society. And the irony of ironies of all this is that Brett Kavanaugh is being nominated and confirmed for the highest seat in the land to interpret the American Constitution. But during that whole process, he isn't accorded the rights as a citizen of the Constitution. This is short-circuiting everything, and it is dividing us more and more. Believe the woman is just a slogan from the left that means nothing at all. And unfortunately, you'll have liberal media that is not interested in facts. This is just another version of Russia, Russia, Russia. Believe it, shut up, and nod your head. That is not how you run due process and equal application of the law. This is a travesty that will have tremendous implications either way it goes.
All right, Alexander, before you comment on that, we had a $10 super chat. And let's see, she says for me to pronounce it, Marcia. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Marcia, please. Okay, and it's on Kavanaugh. $10 super chat. Alexander, if they find evidence on her concocting the story based on Judge's book, Mark Judge, will we see an actual prosecution, i.e. Anita Hill perjured kind of thing, or are we going to see nothing?
Well, I think we will probably see nothing, but I would say that a prosecution is not impossible. I mean, it would be perjury. I mean, I want to make it very clear. I don't know that she's committing perjury. The truth about this affair, the only truth one can say is we don't know what happened 36 years ago. We shouldn't go down the disastrous path of saying, well, I watched these two people and, you know, I liked the way one appeared and I didn't like the way the other appeared, so I believe the one and not the other. That's not the way you should do it. You should, first of all, admit to yourself you don't know. You should then look at what the evidence is, and there is no evidence corroborating her story. And in light of that, since there is no evidence corroborating that story, since there is no way now, after 36 years of going through a trial and deciding who is saying the truth and who is not, the presumption of innocence must apply. And that must, I think, tilt the matter to Kavanaugh. Now, that isn't to say, I want to stress this, that Dr. Ford is necessarily lying. I don't know. It is simply applying what fundamental legal principles of justice and fairness have always said. And it is astonishing to me that people in the United States have lost sight of those so completely.
Again, I want to stress that I I have no reason to believe that something happened to her when she was young. Okay, but saying that it's the fault of Brett Kavanaugh is a stretch because there's no evidence there whatsoever. And it seems to me, I think a common sense person, if you go from the letters that were sent to a representative then to Feinstein, I mean, if you wanted an FBI investigation, why didn't you do it then? No, this is obviously, I mean, she didn't even know, apparently watching the testimony, that she was actually told that Grassley would send a team to her in California. Well, she apparently didn't hear about that because her lawyers probably didn't. Her lawyers, people are saying Feinstein's and her staff leaked her name to the media. I think it was the lawyers that did it. Did you see them? Like, they were like two vultures on one side of the other. Okay. And I have to say the truth here, from what it seemed to me, that she was well coached and not asked any hard questions. I was left speechless after that surrogate woman said she was done. I just thought, you're only beginning. How did you get to this place? How did you get home? I mean, if you're at such a fancy country club, presumably you have a locker. Why are you wearing a wet bathing suit under your clothes? Your best friend is there. You leave without telling her. You never, ever tell her. Okay. And then it was brought up when you're in counseling with your husband about having a second front door on your house. Well, if you want a second front door on your house, maybe you have another problem. Okay. I mean, so many of these things were mentioned. They were dangling threads and nobody wanted to grab onto them. And of course, the Republicans are just cowed on their knees, afraid to ask the truth. Folks, most of the people in that room, in that hearing room, were one of two things: a lawyer or a member of the media. Those people in that room that studied at Yale and Stanford and Harvard, you don't understand how due process works? Really? It was a travesty.
Peter, Alexander, has a question for you, and it's related to the FBI comment that you made, that you touched upon, and not a comment. Actually, a question that I have too, which I want to hear both of your takes on it, but I'll go to you, Peter, first. This is from Alexander. He says, yes, Peter, but you have to hear her testimony. They asked for an expanded investigation by the FBI. So what's wrong with that?
Well, they're going to get the same answers. They're going to talk to the same people. Everybody says this is a he said, she said. No, it's she said, they said. They've already said they have no idea what this is all about. And then her best friend that she was asked about during her hearing, what was her reply? She's been having a lot of trouble. So she's impugning the honesty of her own self-proclaimed best friend, meaning she's incapacitated to remember correctly. I mean, every step of the way, it's deflection. I listened to what she had to say. I watched it live. Okay, so I did listen to her. But the FBI are going to get the same answers that they've already gotten from these same people. It's stalling for time. That's all it is. It's stalling for time. These people, the Democrats and the media, have no interest in justice here. Zero. It's about power. That's what they want. Power. They're not interested in what happened, what's happening, as long as they get the outcome they want. And they'll destroy anyone in their way. That is on display right now.
Alexander, what do you think of the FBI issue? Because the Democrats just pressed on that the whole.
Yes,
I know. FBI. Why were they doing that to Kavanaugh? Why were they trying to bait him?
I think the essential point people have to understand about this is that this is not a criminal investigation. And when we talk about the FBI, it is impossible 36 years after the event to carry out a criminal investigation in this case. What is being discussed, the only thing that the FBI can do is essentially carry out a further vetting procedure in order to inform the Senate, the Senate Judiciary Committee, and now it will be the Senate Majority Leader, about what happened and what the various allegations are, and then it will be left to the Senate to take the matter forward. I am not sure. I cannot see what such an FBI investigation will find out. which has not already been found out and publicized and discussed and talked about at extraordinary lengths already.
It's already been investigated 6 times by the FBI. The FBI, presumably what they're doing right now, they're filling out what are called 302s. Mr. Judge, were you at such a party? And he'll say no, and they're going to write answer no. They're only going to do is that, and then they're going to put it together and they're going to give it to the Senate. They're not investigating this. They are fact collecting, which they have already done with these same individuals.
Yes, and can I just add, by the way, that of course what they're supposed to report to the Senate is supposed to be confidential. Now, of course, the likelihood is it'll be leaked, but in fact, as I said, it's not something we will necessarily know about. Now, can I say something? Allegations have been made about Kavanaugh, as they often are in these cases, which were referred to the Senate before. The Senate and the FBI investigated them in the way that we've just discussed. And that could have happened in this case. And we would have been spared this horrible drama in which, by the way, I think both parties, especially Kavanaugh, but Ford also, were to some extent victims.
Yeah.
The reason that didn't happen is because Feinstein sat on it for 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever. Now, when she received from Ford an allegation of that nature, making an accusation of a very serious criminal offense against Kavanaugh, what Feinstein should have said to Ford is, I'm sorry, I cannot treat an accusation of this kind confidential. I must share it with my colleagues in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and we will have to look into this, and that may involve having the FBI speak to you. That's what Feinstein should have done. Had that happened, we would not now be in the situation we are in. But Feinstein didn't do it, and the only conceivable reason why she didn't do it is because she wanted to keep it back to the very last moment in order to just derail this entire confirmation process.
Remember the 3 days, I think it was 3 days, the confirmation process, 3 days, right? Well, the Democrats didn't lay one glove on him, not one. And so that's when she pulled out this card. Okay, it's not a coincidence, because if they could have derailed him during the nomination, they would have kept quiet about it. But he made it through. You can't say the guy isn't competent, at least then. Then later, it's the yearbook and it's the drinking and all this. That's character assassination.
Yes.
So they just, after they couldn't get him on the merits, then they go after the character thing. This Ford woman has just been used. Okay, again. Apparently somebody used her before. Apparently she had problems in her marriage, and now she's being used again. Okay, she's victimized over and over again, and Kavanaugh and his family have been tainted for life. This is what, when you're possessed ideologically, this is what you're willing to do to your enemy, because you see them as an enemy that must be destroyed. That's how the left thinks.
Alexander, we have a question from Gabarwala, and this one's an interesting one. Bill Cosby was recently convicted of the same thing. So is there precedent for this kind of delayed justice?
Well, I think the point about Cosby, and I think the point about Weinstein, who's not yet, by the way, been convicted, but there's cases against him, is, of course, that here we have a large number of cases which corroborate each other. In the case of Kavanaugh, we don't. I mean, we have one individual who's come forward. There have been 1 or 2 others, but frankly, they don't look particularly credible, and they look rather opportunistic. So I think that there's a fundamental difference when you have a pattern which gets corroborated, if you like, by multiple witnesses. And one, when we're talking about an event 36 years ago, for which there is no corroboration at all. And I would add, of course, something else, which is that in Kavanaugh's case, there are multiple witnesses who have spoken up for his character, including many, many women. So I think talk about precedents in cases like this. I think one should use that word very carefully, because a precedent is not a case of, this case looks a bit like that, so we can do the same thing in another case. A precedent is a legal principle that is established out of one case, which then can be applied more generally in legal proceedings. I don't think you can look at Cosby and say that this is a precedent of anything. It is rather an example of a rather unpleasant man behaving in a frankly appalling way. And finally, after a very long run, justice caught up with him.
I think our users are saying, was Cosby convicted?
Well, yes, he's going to prison.
He's going to prison.
He was, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's jump from Kavanaugh to Trump at the UN and the General Assembly speech. Peter, we talked about this, so let's get Alexander's take real quick. What did you think of Trump at the UN, Alexander?
I think it brings out yet again that this is a president who has a tremendous understanding of U.S. domestic politics.
Great answer.
No understanding at all of international affairs, where he is completely out of his depth. He was talking to a group of people, that's to say the diplomats from around the world, almost the least conducive audience for him. I mean, this is not a criticism of Trump. He goes across the United States. He speaks to ordinary Americans in language they can understand. He relates to them. They relate to him. There is an obvious connection there. Diplomats, the most sophisticated audience, if you like, in the world. I mean, I think he bombed. I think it just didn't make any kind of sense. He was saying things at random, which didn't, to me, make any kind of logic. And I'm afraid, I think this should be a lesson to him to avoid going to the General Assembly in future. This just doesn't play to his strengths, which lie elsewhere. And I mean, he can get much better people to do that for him, Pompeo or whoever, but he shouldn't go to the General Assembly. That was my immediate take on it.
Well, I think he was probably his first question when he was standing at the podium is that, "What? Where are all the MAGA hats?" You know, because that's what he's used to seeing. Okay. No, I mean, Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right. He thinks he can duplicate, West Palm Beach, rally, and it's the same thing, but it's not the same thing at all. All right. And as Alexander, Christoforou, and I have said before, and I don't mean any derision by this, but when you listen to Trump on the stump, and he's a braggart. He's a narcissist. He's the most important person in the room. And he really believes it. He thinks the Chinese think he has a really big brain. That was an interesting one. It's the context, and it works. And he's an amazing communicator. He really is. But when you go on in front of the General Assembly and you start saying, sovereignty is at the core of our foreign policy, and it should be the core of everyone else's. And then he starts saying how we all should collectively destroy the sovereignty of Iran. I mean, these diplomats are just saying, what? I mean, could you be a little bit more subtle, okay? And in Trump's mind, he doesn't see the contradiction whatsoever. And so, they were laughing at him. But I don't think because they think he's stupid, because he's not. It's just that this is not the place that he's saying these kinds of things. This is, like sitting around having a few beers, and it's not that. So, and Alex, Christoforou, and I've talked about this before. There's a pattern here: Singapore, Helsinki, and now this. He's not in his element at these fora. He's just simply not. And if you go through the speech very, very carefully, I don't know who wrote it for him. It's just that you really can't get what the contents of that speech past that audience without them giggling, because it doesn't make any sense. I mean, talking about the vibrancy of Israeli democracy, and how the crown prince in Saudi Arabia have a grand plan for modernization. I mean, these are cartoonish. It's cartoonish, and obviously the audience knew that. So. Do you think? But does Trump care? No, not in the slightest. As soon as he walked off that stage, it's in the rearview mirror. Who cares? Okay.
Alexander, that was a comment actually made by Pamela just now when Peter said that. It said Trump was elected to save America. He doesn't care about the UN, and he told them so.
Absolutely. Perfect. Said well.
Well, I mean, I agree, but I mean, maybe he would not. It was still not wise to say it all like that in the United Nations General Assembly. I mean, he can say that to his people in America, but to do it in that particular way, in ways that make people laugh at him, I don't think that makes him sound impressive or threatening or whatever it was that he was.
It undermines him. It undermines because look. I think all of us would agree everything's in flux right now. Look what's happening with the U.S. sanctioning European countries and companies over Iran and all that. And America's partners, they're going to wonder, can we make a deal with this guy, with this administration? Because he broke the deal with Iran. He's very unclear what his policy is in Syria. I mean, he creates this intense sense of ambiguity about what's going on. What people get from his speech that the U.S. is in crisis, and this is not a time where they can make a deal that you can be sure that they'll keep. All right, and I think that creates this instability and ambiguity that would undermines Trump on the world stage. Because, you know, even 20 years ago, the U.S. could pretty easily, in the wake of the Cold War, get its way. Those days, that window of getting what it wants, absolutely is closing. This is the time to start engaging the world. I mean, Trump has made it clear he hates multilateralism, okay? But the only way the U.S. will be able to achieve its goals is through multilateralism. Sure, defending national interest and sovereignty, you can have both simultaneously. They're not mutually exclusive, and Trump doesn't understand that.
Alexander, there's a lot of people in the chat talking about the UN. The UN should be shut down. The UN stands for United Nothing. Other people are saying that the UN is a tool of the US and the West. What do you guys think of the UN in whole?
I think the UN actually plays a very vital role. And can I just explain first of all what it is? The UN is where the world powers, the great powers meet, and the key institution is not the General Assembly, it's the Security Council. And when the great powers on the Security Council work together, which they often do, by the way, it doesn't always get reported, but they often work on lots of things together, it tends to work well. They need that place to communicate with each other. But the other important role that the UN has is that it is the central keystone of the whole system of international law. International law is constructed around the UN and the UN Charter. So when we talk, for example, about the attacks on Libya, on Syria, on Iraq, being against international law.
Someone mentioned Rwanda as well.
Iran, indeed, whatever.
Rwanda.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's come to Rwanda. When we talk about these things, being against international law, these wars, the reason we're able to say that is because they are contradicted by the Charter of the United Nations. Now, Rwanda was a terrible civil conflict. It spiraled out of control in the most awful way. A hideous genocide was committed there. There is some uncertainty about who was responsible. I don't know enough about it. I'm not going to talk about that. The point was, there was a potential consensus in the Security Council of the United Nations to deal with it. The reason it wasn't dealt with was because the two countries that were most reluctant to interfere in Rwanda at that time were the United States and Britain. That is the public historical record. The problem was not the United Nations at that time. It was British, UN, and US policy. You know, Rwanda is constantly brought up. It wasn't necessary. It isn't necessary. It isn't appropriate to link the United Nations into it. Can I just give an example? Let's talk about the Libyan conflict, which is a conflict which is, it also began, it seems, as an internal conflict in Libya. What could have happened there is it would have been entirely possible to frame a Security Council resolution with the agreement of all the great powers, in which you could have had a ceasefire, a negotiation between the parties, and perhaps some kind of temporary peacekeeping force sent to Libya to basically stabilize that that situation whilst the negotiation was underway. Gaddafi indicated that he would agree to such a resolution. Again, the reason the whole thing fell apart was because of British and US policy. They decided to go for a military intervention. They did the opposite of what they did in Rwanda. Instead of where in Rwanda they let the events take their course, in Libya they decided to intervene. But in both cases, they went against the majority feelings within the Security Council.
I don't have a whole lot more to add to that. I would be counterintuitive in answering that question. Is that a great deal of the time the United Nations isn't allowed to function correctly? Yeah. Okay, yeah. And it's because if the U.S. doesn't get, the U.S. likes the UN as a fig leaf for what it does in the world, and if it doesn't get that fig leaf, it just does what it wants anyway. Look at Iraq, all right. Of course, the UN is wasteful. There's too many long-term bureaucrats that live off the fat of the land. Yeah, I get that. Okay, but a plus is that there's a lot of poor countries in the world that they don't have any representation in a major forum, and that's a place for them to be able to be heard. I think that's important there. But I think at the end of the day, it's the UN isn't allowed to function in a way in a way that it is designed. And we have to keep in mind, the UN was created for what reason? A very simple reason: to avoid World War III. And for all of its flaws, it's been able to keep the peace. All right. And I think that's something that, maybe younger people don't understand, but the trauma of 2 world wars, one right after another, and then the advent of the atomic age, yelling and screaming and squabbling at the United Nations Security Council is a lot better than lobbing missiles at each other. So I'm not as harsh on the UN. I would like to see a lot of reforms there. Absolutely. A lot more streamlining. Absolutely. And countries like China need to put up more. India needs to put up more. These countries, they have wealth, and they're having growing influence. And I personally think one of the most contentious issues of all is that we have to have a reassigning of the seats on the Security Council. And France and Britain on the Security Council, those days, that's antiquated. They don't belong there. Maybe a EU seat, okay? Maybe something like that. But Japan, one of the largest economies in the world, it doesn't punch at its weight. There's got to be India. It's got a major reassessment. What about a country that represents Africa? There's nobody there. They're still treated as colonials by the British and the French. All right. So the United Nations, I don't say disband, but it needs a real major rethink, and it shouldn't have the West shouldn't have a monopoly on it, and it does. It uses it. Okay, and the world has changed dramatically since it was put into place.
I would agree with all of that. I mean, one thing that I absolutely do agree with, by the way, is that the UN bureaucracy, the Secretariat, needs to be massively downsized. I mean, it has got completely out of control, and an awful lot of what it does really is not just not useful, it's actually strongly counterproductive, and large parts of it, because the US disproportionately pays the bills and of course hosts the whole thing, large parts of the bureaucracy have just become branches, very expensive branches of the State Department. So I think it does need to be downsized, but I think the actual core institution, the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the Charter, they do play a useful role in the modern world, and I think we would be in serious difficulty if we didn't have them.
All right, Peter, we had a question before we did the live chat, and we are approaching 1 hour, by the way, guys. So send in your super chats. Also, you can donate to our Patreon and PayPal page. We really appreciate it. Peter from Vinod, who would like us to discuss actually about the trade war between the US and China and what would be the most likely outcome.
I think Trump is overplaying his hand, to be honest with you. I think I've said it before here. China has a huge internal market. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be trading with countries like the United States. I think 19% of its exports go to the United States. Okay, that 19% is a big number, again, in dollar terms. But I don't see. This is again, I think this is the way Trump looks at it. He wants to push to greater and greater tension, and then the Chinese will come out with a grand deal. I think that's misunderstanding the Chinese. I mean, he's not in the New York real estate market. He's on the global stage, and China has massive resources. And I think that Trump, the way he's treating the Chinese is very insulting from their perspective. Okay, he might just think he's playing the tough guy like a cowboy. Okay, and from his perspective, he is, but the Chinese don't interpret it that way. So I think the whole approach is a bit counterproductive. I think that I've said all along, Trump is onto something here. I mean, the U.S. has been really lax in its trading deals. And its trading deals were always predicated that the U.S. would have hegemony wherever they have a sweetheart trading deal. I mean, it was what Alexander Mercouris like 20 years ago. If we let them into the WTO, they'll become like us. They'll become Jeffersonian democracy, and we'll have NGOs, and we'll have freedom of speech, and they'll have their own constitution. They just cut and paste from the American one, just put China in there. That's this stupid thing. That's stupid thinking. Okay. No, the Chinese got a sweetheart deal. All right, let's make some money and let's keep it up. Okay. Why would you? I don't blame them. I mean, the U.S. was in this agreement. Now they want to change it. Well, okay, we got to sit down and renegotiate. It's going to be kind of tough, but don't make any fait accomplis. That's not how you negotiate. All right. So I mean, I don't think we're in a 1930s, trade wars, because that led to a great degree to the Second World War, particularly when you look in the Pacific with the Japanese. I don't think we're even remotely near that right now. My biggest concern is how the U.S. has weaponized the dollar and actually devaluing the currency by turning it into a political weapon. The Chinese know that, and they're taking advantage of it.
Alexander, do you want to say something about the U.S.-China? Before you say something, Alexander, Vicky G donated $9.99 to us via Super Chat. Just says, always interesting hearing different points of view. Thank you all. Go ahead, Alexander.
Thank you very much, Vicky.
Make that answer particularly good right now.
Yeah. Well, can I just go back a little further with the history than Peter does, which is, of course, the reason the U.S. opened up to China in the first place, back in the 70s and 80s, was because it wanted to play China off against the US's big adversary, which was the Soviet Union. So this is where the origin was. They didn't understand, I think, that by opening up to China in the way that they were doing, they were in fact creating a Frankenstein's monster, a gigantic economy, which would in fact, for the first time since the Second World War, since in fact much beyond the Second World War, challenge the economic hegemony of the United States. And now they're trying to slam the brakes on all of this, even though they created this themselves.
Well, they allowed it to happen.
They allowed it to happen. And I mean, so in a way, in a sense, it's a problem yet again of not thinking through the consequences fully of what you do. And by the way, they're talking sometimes and doing the same thing with India. And who knows, maybe in 20 years' time, we'll be hearing the same thing about India also. But anyway, turning to China, the point to understand about China is, yes, it has a vast internal market. Yes, it will be able to absorb these problems very easily, which it will. I mean, I was in China about a year ago, and that was overwhelmingly the takeaway I had of the situation there then. Yes, the Chinese will not take this line down. So what are the Chinese going to do? They're going to look for friends. And the first friend they're looking at is Russia, the country with which the United States is now in conflict. Russia, of course, has the gas, the oil, the strategic minerals, the
everything,
food, all the things that China needs. So now we have increasing economic linkages between China and Russia. We have a burgeoning relationship between the two presidents of these countries. We have this massive military exercise in eastern Russia, with the Chinese playing an active role in that. And all the things the US is doing is going to make all that accelerate. Does the United States have other options? Yes, it does. It can sit down with the Chinese. It can explain to the Chinese that there are all these problems with the United States from Chinese imports. Chinese are pragmatic, realistic people. I have no doubt at all. They don't want to have an enemy of the United States. They would work with the United States to sort through these problems. The United States can sit down with the Russians and sort out all the various problems they have with Russia. Russia has no interest to be an enemy of the United States. Again, the options are there. They're just not being taken because the United States always has this confrontational approach to all the problems that it faces everywhere.
And this is one of the fears that the Pentagon has. They don't look at the trade issue specifically with China, but they need China as a target, because if you look at the web of alliances the United States has created all through the Pacific, from the north all the way down to the south, what is it based on? It's not a revisionist Japan. No, okay. It is how to calculate dealing with China. So again, China needs to be a threat, because then if it's not really a threat, then why do you need to be pouring billions and billions and billions of dollars every single year into this web of alliances? And the US wants to keep that system in place, which of course is a liability. The more alliances you're in, the greater the possibility an accident can happen and you're pulled into a conflict. I'm pretty sure when Barack Obama was told about the morning after the coup in Kiev, he says, "What did we do that? Why are we involved in that conflict? Nothing to do with us." Okay, his State Department, Victoria Nuland, all these people did this. Okay, I don't think Barack Obama was directly involved with the decision making with Ukraine at all. But then it becomes he has to own it. Okay, and the same thing is this with these alliances, and the Chinese know that they can mess with the United States because of this alliance system, because it's too complicated. The U.S. has kind of outsourced how its military actually can be used. No power should do that. It's reckless. Okay, that's how you get into August 1914.
Alexander, we have a question from Duncan McCohen. He says, will increasing U.S. economic pressure on Germany's vital economic interests play into the hands of the AfD and revive German nationalism?
Well, yeah, the answer is yes, and it's already happening. Again, I come back to what I said. I know quite a lot about Germany. I mean, Germany is a country which 20, 30 years ago was very pro-American. It is becoming increasingly disenchanted and concerned because its vital interests are not being attended to. The United States constantly interferes with them. It interferes with them by trying to affect its energy imports from Russia, and is not able to provide any conceivable economically viable substitute to those energy imports. It also completely fails to understand how important for Germany's relations with Russia are. I mean, Russia is the country which Germany fought and lost a catastrophic war against. That is something that many Germans know and understand and remember. They will not forget that quickly. They need to have a stable relationship with Russia. The Germans also see the way that the United States is clamping down, or increasingly clamping down, on their manufactured exports to the United States. And of course, the German people, many German people are saying, can we go on in this relationship in which we are treated by the United States in this way? Is it not time that we start reasserting our own national interests? Exactly. And the AfD began that way. It began as a Bismarckian party.
I mean, I keep hearing this German nationalism thing, and I'm not really buying into it. I think that there's a concern with sovereignty, being able to, the Germans they don't want outside powers to determine what their trade policies are, for example, or if they should be involved in a military adventure abroad. So I think, we could do a separate podcast on the issue of nationalism in Germany because of its past. and what Alexander Mercouris mentioned. But I think that the point that is being addressed here is sovereignty. Okay, very Trumpian in a way.
Can I just point out that here we have the famous white. Can you see him? Can everybody see him? This is the white bird that flew past. As you can see, he's a rather big dog.
All right. Zainab David has just became a gold patron on Patreon. Thank you very much for that. Guys, people are asking, do you think Kavanaugh will be confirmed?
Yes.
Yes, I think in the end he will be. I think this FBI investigation that's going to happen, I think it will be very short, and I think it will basically say what we said before, that there's no real evidence to substantiate these allegations, and I think the Republicans in the Senate will hold together, and I think he will be confirmed. A lot of damage has been done.
A lot of damage has been done. Thank you.
Alexander, what do you think about what's happening with the church in Ukraine, and they're trying to divide it from the church in Russia?
Well, I should say that I had some. I actually heard some people while I was in Greece over the summer who have connections. One of them actually works for the Patriarchate in Constantinople. And they both said, this particular person, but I also heard it from some other people, said to me that the Patriarch of Constantinople came under huge pressure from the United States to make this decision. And I think he made a terrible mistake. I think what he has done is be outside his powers. I don't think he has the power to do this thing. I think he has severely antagonized the Russian church, which is furious with him. And I think he has upset an awful lot of people in Ukraine itself, where the Orthodox Church has always, the majority of Orthodox believers, the great majority of Orthodox believers, stick with the Orthodox Church, which is connected to Russia. So I'm afraid, I think this is a disastrous mistake. I think it's going to do huge damage to the Orthodox community. I think that it is a direct result of outside political interference in church decisions, which does not belong. In fact, I was told that that was what had happened. And I'm afraid that the only way out of this is a proposal that some people are saying, though I don't know whether this will happen, which will be to bring together a general conclave of the Orthodox Church and to try and get Constantinople and Patriarch Bartholomew, who up to now I've had a certain liking and respect for, to revisit this decision and to accept that he is wrong. But whether he will or not, I don't know.
Well, and the damage it's doing inside of Ukraine is just unspeakable.
Yeah, I mean, it just
being raided and looted, and it, for me, up until 2014, Ukraine was a country close to my heart, really. I loved going to Kiev. I loved that city. Wonderful, warm people. The pace is a little slower, a lot cheaper than Moscow. And they're taking this issue that is really, up until now, been the only thing that holds them all together. And now they're creating a schism there. And it's just really cold, calculated, mean politics. Okay, now they want to start a civil war within the Orthodox community in Ukraine, and this is all being done intentionally.
Absolutely. Well, we said, I mean, as I said, it was. I can't disclose the nature of the source. All I will say is he was somebody I met in Athens who is in a position to know. And as I said, it was intense political lobbying came from the United States, and that does not belong in the church. And as Peter correctly says, it's just created another cause of division within Ukraine, which is shocking and tragic and very wrong. And the people who are responsible for this, they cannot be criticized too strongly, but of course they won't be, because all of this has been done in secret, in a very bad and corrupt way.
Blizzard Veritas had a comment earlier when we were talking about the UN. He said he's surprised to see that we are pro-UN. How would you describe your comments on the UN? Would you say it's pro-UN or?
No.
No.
Wait. We're not anti-UN. Okay,
No.
we're not anti-UN. Just to refresh, it needs to be reformed. It's a wasteful institution. It's not very effective. The Security Council has to be completely reformed to reflect present day realities. Okay, I think that's a minimalist list here. And if that doesn't work, then get rid of it. Okay, but we've got to try.
I mean, for me, I mean, I don't. It's not for me a question of whether one is for or against the UN. For me, it is something. It is part of the necessary furniture. If the UN did not exist, and by the UN, I really again say it's these three things: the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the UN Charter. And to some extent, I should say the International Court of Justice, which is a complicated institution, not as powerful as some people think, but it does have a useful role. If these institutions did not exist, we would have to create something very like them for the international system to work at all. The UN is not the enemy of sovereignty, which is, I think, what a lot of people think and why they feel nervous about it. It is its defender. If you look at the UN Charter, that is what it is all about. It is where the concept of the sovereignty of states is most strongly embedded. It is what gives it its legal force. If you don't have an institution like the UN, then you don't have a system of international law as we would understand it. And given the highly predatory nature of certain powers, the United States, I'm sorry to say, most of all, I think we would have a very dangerous situation in the world indeed. Reform the Security Council, as Peter said, absolutely. Bring countries like India and Japan and possibly Brazil and others, and the African Union, maybe even the European Union in, definitely. Downsize this bureaucracy that exists in New York and does, frankly, a little that is good, definitely. But as I said, its core institutions, the ones that were created after the Second World War, in response to the Second World War, I think they're an essential part of the international furniture, if you like, and we would dispense with them at our peril.
All right, we got a lot of questions, and we're close to 700 people, so let's try to knock these out. Peace and Love has a question to Peter and Alexander. What could lead to the normalization of Russia-Ukraine relations like it was before 2013? Has Russia lost Ukraine?
No, I don't think Russia has lost Ukraine. I think, if I may say so, I think that sooner or later, probably later rather than sooner, but I think eventually these two countries will come together again in some form, simply because the synergies are so obvious and the depths of culture and history are so profound. I mean, Peter has been to Ukraine, I never have, but people who have been there tell me that it's obviously very close to Russia. Yeah. And to deny that reality, and of course, cities like Odessa, for example, I mean, are overwhelmingly, they are Russian. I mean, culturally, historically, politically, they are. I mean, to deny that fact is to deny reality. So sooner or later, it will happen. Now, how will it happen? First of all, and this has to be faced, the present government has to change. I mean, we can't expect the kind of regime, and I use that word very carefully and intentionally, the kind of regime that was created as a result of the anti-constitutional, illegal and violent coup that took place in Ukraine in 2014. We cannot expect that regime to create good policies with Russia. That isn't going to happen. But I don't believe that regime is going to survive forever. Nothing is ever forever. And I think in time, one way or the other, by some means or other, which perhaps one can't immediately see, there will be a convergence again. Now, that may take a while to happen. And unfortunately, one of the great problems is that the Western powers are doing everything they can to make that process as complicated and as difficult as it can be. But sooner or later, I am sure that will be what will happen.
Yeah,
Peter.
just real quickly, because it was such an excellent answer here. What the impetus couldn't be. Look, the European Union made a lot of promises. It was decorative promises in the association agreement. It's not benefiting Ukraine at all. Okay, I mean, how much is U.S.-Ukrainian trade? I don't even think it exists. And with the breaking off of trade relations with Russia, Ukraine is isolating itself. Ukraine doesn't make anything the European Union wants. The last thing they need is another agriculture country. Do you think French farmers going to go with that? No. Okay. It's going to be the European Union that's going to have to give them the tough medicine and say, look, we can just do so much for you. We're not going to let the IMF give you money that you're just going to steal. All right. The U.S. should stop arming Ukraine, because those arms will just be sold to someone, maybe in the Donbass, maybe sold in the Middle East. Okay, you know, they don't get anything out of it for their own security, the European Union and the United States, but they could certainly help with the moving forward of the average person in Ukraine, because what we have now, unless we have movement from the Western side, it's going to stay a frozen conflict. And that's a sad day when you think that's the best you can do is a sad conflict. There has to be political will. There's an election cycle going on in Ukraine. Everyone's going to extremes. No one can say a good word about Russia. So Alexander Mercouris is right. It's not in the near future. It's not in the midterm. It's going to be a while. They have to fail to start over again, unfortunately.
All right, we got a super chat for $20. Thank you, gentlemen. So refreshing to hear intelligent conversation. That super chat was from American Rebel 27. Thank you very much, American Rebel. And Peter, we have a question for you. If you want to answer it, that's great. If you don't, it's up to you. We can pass over it. It says, Peter, do you think the UK government will try again to close down RT anytime soon?
Let me put it this way, because I can't really speak for RT, but it's someone that works there. The UK government does not have a friendly posture towards RT. I've been speaking to people, I don't even want to name the institution, but some people that have been explained to me the criticisms some people have of RT in the UK. And my first reaction was, I said, well, why do people watch it? Why? No one is forced to watch it. So what is the problem there? Of course, they couldn't give me an answer. And then the gentleman who was asking me the questions, he actually said, well, my brother actually watches it. And then we just started laughing. I told him, you know, I wish I had, you know, these kind of Nobel Prize winning unique ideas. I'm sorry, folks, I don't. I'm a ferocious reader. I read everything, and it's a culmination of things that I read and I think and that I've studied in my past. Nobody at RT is saying anything that you haven't heard somewhere else. We just have it kind of all in one place, okay? So, yeah, the UK remains very antagonistic towards RT America and RT International, where I work.
Okay. Blizzard Veritas wants to know if this discussion is going to be available to download after this. Yes, it will. It will be available on YouTube. And staying with you, Peter, Command Unit wants to know, what was the mood in Russia after the Israeli thing happened?
I'll tell you what, again, something that you'll probably never hear or very rarely hear. First of all, there was real sorrow. One of my producers, Katya, her father's in the military, I don't know if he's active or retired, but in the Air Force. So here's a family that takes it really hard because it's one of their brethren, you know. I mean, it's like most professional militaries in the world. I mean, once you're in the Brotherhood, you're always in the Brotherhood, and you take it really hard. I didn't hear words of revenge. I heard, we need to put this to an end. What most people, the propaganda about Russia is so off in so many ways. Russians do not want conflict. They want to avoid conflict. The scars of the 20th century, the revolution, the Civil War, the Second World War, the scars are everywhere, every day. And that is what they want to avoid, is conflict. They don't glorify war here. They respect military service and sacrifice. So when they heard that plane went down, a lot of people crossed themselves. You know, we lost some of our boys over there. And, you know, and Israel is responsible for it. And the way they tried to wiggle out of it really annoyed a lot of people. Now, keep this in mind. There's a lot of Soviet Jews in Israel right now and on the West Bank. Russia and Israel have a very complicated relationship. It's very complicated. I know a lot of people don't like the relationship. My default position is they have to talk, okay? Everybody wants to say, shut off Israel, cut off diplomatic relations. No, what would that achieve? It doesn't achieve anything. You got to talk. And they do talk, and they actually talk a lot. And if Israel can't get its act together, they're going to feel the consequences of it, because, you know, a Syrian plane is going to be no different than a Russian plane. And then you've upped the ante. Now, maybe this will give reason to end this ridiculous situation in Idlib, end this war that never should have started in the first place. Would Israel have a say in it? Yes, it would. I'm sorry to disappoint everybody. It has to be the whole region, including Israel, to put this to an end. Will they get everything they want? No. Will they get some? Maybe. But that will apply to just about every other party that would be acting in good faith.
A $10 super chat from Courtney. Thank you, Courtney. Alexander, switching gears. Alexander, North Korea says they cannot denuclearize without trust with the US. The question is, why denuclearize in a nuclear world?
Well, indeed, I'm sure lots of people in North Korea, at least in the government, are probably asking that very same question. I think North Korea, if it can get really secure guarantees and can move forward towards some process of reunification with South Korea. And I think the thing about unification in the Korean Peninsula, what people need to understand is that, unlike in Germany, it is the communist North which has always pushed for it. In Germany, it was the capitalist West which wanted it, the communist East which resisted it. In Korea, it's been the opposite. It's been the communist North that has wanted some kind of reunification with the South, and the South which has been resisting it or nervous about it, provided the North Koreans
under American pressure. Remember that.
Well, absolutely. Provided the North Koreans can get those security guarantees, and provided they can move forward a process of Korean unification, which will protect their own position in North Korea and will ensure the sovereignty and independence of the Korean nation, something that is very important for Koreans generally. I think that they will say, well, if we can get to that point, then nuclear weapons that we have developed at enormous expense to ourselves have served our purpose, and we can move forward without them. Getting to that point is going to be enormously difficult, and maybe we will not achieve it because the North Koreans, for very obvious and good reasons, do not trust the United States. And just as Peter said just now, the United States is the obstacle to Korean unification. So you've got to try and unscramble all of these things. And go on.
You need to think imaginatively. Okay. What does China have with Hong Kong? One country, two systems. Okay. Why can't you have one country, two systems? Who knows? For a certain time period, maybe forever. What is security guarantees? So everybody throws this around. I'll tell you what it is. Under certain circumstances, I think that China and Russia would take on that security if there was a unification, something that we could call unification, maybe a different word, maybe different words help sometime, okay? But where we have a coming together of the two Koreas in one form or another, the Chinese and the Russians might feel comfortable to say, for the interim, as this process is going on, we could give a protection net to that. American troops will have to leave during this process. Everybody has to have step by step, and that creates the trust, okay? You've got to be imaginative about this. It is possible. It is possible. I think what's being negotiated right now, folks, is what the Russians and the Chinese proposed already, okay? Western media never says it. But they're doing exactly as the Chinese and the Russians suggested. They were on the same page on it, all right? This is what's happening right now. Regime survival is the most important for the North, okay? That what the regime means may change through time if this unification process can happen. It's a very, very delicate process. I think it can be done. It's, you know, because we have Kavanaugh and Trump, and it's always Trump, and it's Trump, and it's Trump. Look what's going on in the peninsula. It's amazing what's going on right now. And it's because of the two Koreas.
Yeah.
They're doing this themselves, step by step. Same people, same language, same culture, same victimization of outsiders, all right? They understand each other better than we could ever imagine. It's like dealing with your family. Let the family work on it. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a lot of hard work. But you listen to Pompeo and all these people and Bolton, you know, they don't want this to happen. I say let the Koreans deal with it. And if they need assistance, ask the United States, ask China, ask Russia to get them to where they want to be. I believe this can happen, but there are too many people and institutions that want to sabotage this, and they make inroads, unfortunately.
All right, we got a £5 super chat, Peter. Your comment on RT got a lot of people talking. Everyone really loves RT on the chat, and they're saying a lot of good things about RT. Thanks. And the question on the super chat is once again about RT. It says, RT airs plenty of debate on the politics of other countries, but little about Russian political divisions. And the question is, why should we trust RT more than the BBC?
I've been asked this question many, many times, and I'll try to keep it short and concise. When RT started, and I was there from the very beginning, and we had so many news stories about Russia, political parties, political figures, elections. The big issue lately was pension reform. I mean, they're still talking about it, okay? And we soon began to realize that nobody knew what we were talking about, okay? Because of what the idea of Russia is so fixed in the Western mind that if we actually talk about pension reform, they'll think, why are they talking about pension reform when everyone's in prison and there's no electricity and they're eating rats, okay? And this is what we came up against the first couple of years, is that nobody understood what we were talking about when we were reporting news on what happens in Russia. When there's something big happens in Russia, we obviously report it, okay? When there's the elections, when I think we did have some stuff on on pension reform, but it's people, their eyes just kind of glass over when we start talking about these things. Every Sunday after we do bullhorns, you know, I ask Dima Babic, you know, what are your parents saying? What are your friends saying? You know, and he's telling you this, and this, and this, and it's so parochial. It's so banal on many ways. I mean, when there's a catastrophe, when there's a fire, a plane crash, and all that, that's our headline. We run with that. Breaking news, breaking news. There's nothing hidden that we're not trying to hide something that's actually happening in the country. It's kind of a normal place. I mean, do you want to have news reports on the new parks that they keep building every week in Russia, in Moscow alone? You know, they just finished repaving the road in front of my house, okay? It's just improving the city, reform, modernization. That's the story. I guess some people might be interested in it. It's a local story. So there's nothing that we're trying to hold back when we report on what's going on here. I hope that answers the question.
All right, great. And we got another $20 super chat from Alex Alexander. He says, "Otlично show, spasiba." Spasiba, Alexander. We try to do a wonderful show. Thank you very much. He wrote that in Russian, by the way. Thank you, Alexander, for the super chat. What is going on with the FISA story? We touched upon that earlier. Is there any news on the FISA as of yet, or has it been buried, finished?
I don't think it's been buried. I think that we'll get a truncated version of it. Earlier in our session here, for Trump's inner circle and a lot of people in MI6, I think that they'd be revealing too much. Of course, that's exactly what we all want. Is we want the truth and not having it abbreviated and truncated and redacted. I think Trump's going to keep to his word. I think it will get enough of a teaser to prove everything we've been saying for the last 2 years is correct.
I agree with that. I think we will see all this material eventually. Where we've seen 5%, we will perhaps see 50 to 60%.
And that'll be enough. It'll be enough. It'll be enough.
All right, from Command Unit, Alexander, any new or old info we should know about MH17?
Well, there has been actually, and it's been quite interesting. Now, I have to say this is not entirely new, but because it had been sort of ventured about before. But the Russians have produced further report about MH17, in which they say that they've tracked down the serial number of the missile that shot down MH17. And in fact, that serial number is not disputed because the Dutch investigators and all those people have published that serial number already. And they've been able to find that it was in fact made in 1986. We already knew that.
In the Soviet Union.
In the Soviet Union, and that it was transferred to a military unit in what is now Ukraine, and it has stayed there. Now, that, it seems to me, is consistent with an awful lot of other evidence that has been coming out of Russia. We've had the information about the Buk missile. We see the satellite pictures of Ukrainian Buk missile batteries that were located in the eastern Donbass at the time when MH17 was shot down, which the Ukrainians have denied, but which are now accepted as true. We've also had information about a big forensic examination carried out by Almaz Ante, which is the company that produces the Buk missile, which was able to locate, to pinpoint the place where they said this missile was launched from. And we've had radar data, which also suggests that it cannot have been launched from where the Ukrainians and the US and the Dutch say it was. So we've had this mountain of information coming out of Russia, with this latest information being extremely interesting. And I should also say the Russians have also provided some intercept evidence. The problem is, of course, in the West, nobody pays any attention. It's as if all of this information, which cumulatively looks extremely impressive, it's as if this information never existed. Instead, what we get are the photos, I would say, fairly obviously photoshopped photos that Bellingcat produces, and the garbled stories that Ukrainian witnesses, mainly interviewed by Ukrainian investigators, say, and these intercepts, which are which the Ukrainians have produced, which are subject to all sorts of possible interpretations. And of course, there's the famous satellite data that John Kerry talked about, which we've never seen and which we will apparently never see. Yeah. So we've had all this, as I said, quite impressive evidence coming out of Russia. We've had dribs and drabs of, frankly, very unimpressive evidence coming from the Ukrainians and from the West. We never hear about the Russian evidence, and I'm afraid that's what's going to.
All that mattered was hours after it fell from the sky. John Kerry went on all the cable stations and said the Russians did it. End of story.
End of story.
End of story. We got a $10 super chat from Pugsley Adams. Peter, will Iran increase its military footprint in Syria with the addition of the S-300 and upgrades? And how will Israel counter Russia in the Middle East?
Well, I think that. The government of Assad will work with the Iranians, and they will look at their security needs. I mean, Syria doesn't want to kick out foreign invaders to bring in other foreigners. Not at all. The Russian footprint is so small. It's so misunderstood. I mean, the Russians go in there, they're lean and mean, get the job done and go home. They have no intention of staying there outside of the base that they've had there for decades, and military assistance as required by the Assad government. I think, going back to one of my earlier answers, is that the Russians are in a key position to talk to the Israelis and to the Iranians, and to find some kind of compromise where, Syria doesn't end up being a doormat that everybody steps on, okay, to protect Syria's sovereignty. and I think at the end of the day, the Israelis will be open to that. I may not say it publicly, but they want to make sure that they don't have Iranian units on their border. I get that. Okay, I get it. Okay, but Assad ultimately has that decision, and Russia can be the guarantor that everybody gets something. Remember, you're never going to get everything you want. You got to learn to grow up and accept that you'll get something, and then everyone can walk away saving face and saving Syria and its people that want to come back home and want to be rid of these terrorists in Idlib. So I think that can be the grand bargain, which of course I think Alexander Mercouris would agree with me. That could kickstart a new vision for the Middle East, a new vision for U.S.-Russia relations. It's all possible, but
Absolutely.
not all the parties want to parlay. This is what's so frustrating.
Alexander, you have a quick comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I mean, I agree with Peter on the subject of the military presence. I mean, the Iranian military presence in Syria, what we know about it suggests that it's very small. And the Iranian military is no conceivable threat to Israel. I mean, I think we need to be very clear about this. I mean, whatever military units the Iranians have in Syria, they are not in a position to challenge the Israeli military. I mean, not close.
And I don't even think Assad would allow it. He's not. Why are you fighting here?
Exactly. Well, why? Well, indeed, why would he allow it? Of course not. As for the Russians in Syria, well, every time they are challenged in Syria, that makes their footprint bigger. So, I mean, that's what's so challenging the Russians isn't driving them out. It's making their presence stronger. Now, I don't think the Russians have any conceivable interest in getting tangled up with the Israelis in the Middle East. So, I mean, they're not looking for a fight with the Israelis in the Middle East. I think the Israelis are far too intelligent to want to fight with the Russians, actually, who are far more powerful than they are. So, I mean, you know, we need to keep calm about this. And I think that there is, just as Peter said, great scope for compromise, provided people want compromise. The problem always with the Middle East, as elsewhere, is that compromise with Russia, especially, and with Iran also, is not a word that is much used or understood in Washington.
All right, from Harry, we have a question to Peter. Your best guess, in what direction will Russia go when Putin is out of office?
In the same direction. It will continue down this path. Two pillars of what Vladimir Putin has been about. It's so simple. You don't need a think tank. Modernization and sovereigntization. Continue to modernize the country so they don't have to be beholden to the West in any way, shape, or form. In any form, all right? That means having good financial institutions. That means cutting down on corruption, which is happening. It's happening ever so much. Corruption is moving up the food chain, like everywhere else in the world, okay? Average people don't feel it anymore. They did when I first moved here. And making sure that no one, under any circumstances, under any combination, Russia's sovereignty will be threatened by outsiders. Those are the two things. It's been always those two things. Very simple. And I haven't even mentioned foreign policy because in the scheme of things, that has not really been a high priority of the successive Russian governments since 2000. Yeah, believe it or not, that's true.
Alexander, what do you think?
No, I agree with Peter. I mean, we've discussed this before on other live chats. I mean, at the end of the day, Russia will follow its own national interests. The reason Putin has been around for so long and has been so successful is because he has worked with the grain. He has done what Russian national interests require. And any government that he now creates, the government that succeeds him, which I think, by the way, will probably be much the same government as the one we have now. I mean, we will see a lot of the same people around when he's gone that we're seeing at the moment. Any government is going to continue the same policies for the simple reason that they're in Russia's interests and because they're working. I mean, what Peter said about the country becoming more prosperous, less corrupt. I started coming to Russia in 1998, and I've seen the difference. And even in the last couple of years where they've had a recession, I've been able to see how things incrementally get better. Why would you want to change that? There's no real call in Russia to change that. And yes, there is politics. Peter talked about the pension reform, which we talked about with Alex Christoforou a few weeks ago on one of our programs. Yes, there is going to be electoral contests. There were some very interesting election results in the Far East in Russia, which have attracted a certain amount of attention in Russia. But if you look at the underlying policies, even of those people who won those elections in the Far East, they don't differ very much in the end from what Putin himself is talking about. So we will see continuity, and we will see that continuity evolve and change as circumstances evolve and change. But we should not be looking and expecting any radical breaks, because we're not going to be in.
See, what is if you can really, put into a kind of a nutshell what's happened under Putin's time in high politics is that he's kind of delineated the playing field.
Yeah.
When I first moved here in 1998, it was chaos. Everything was chaos. Okay, political parties came and went. That we called them taxi parties. It was for an oligarch to get into parliament to have immunity. Okay, from prosecution. That was all what a political party was all about. Okay, now that we have the playing field, we know the parameters of it. Problems have been identified and they've been addressed. Okay, this is the sense of moving forward, and that's exactly what. And there are people here that are very impatient for that. Yeah, okay. Particularly a lot of young people. They want to see more prosperity. They want to see some. Because for the first 12 years, it was whoa. It was like being on a roller coaster here. I mean, it was things were really happening and really good things. Then we had the financial shock of 2008. Then we had a recession, and I would actually call it a growth recession, but we could talk about that another time. Absolutely. So there's a lot of high expectations here, but Putin will leave behind the infrastructure, as it were, of a functioning state and society. Because there's, my regret in politics is that there's not a real Russian conservative party, and I'd really like to see one come into being. Okay, because we have a party called United Russia, and it's I call it the pedestal party of power. Okay, they just say I'm for Putin. Well, that's a little bit more complicated politics here. Okay, and they need to do that. I'm not impressed by them at all. Okay, I'm not really impressed by any of the political parties, to be honest with you.
Can I just finish one little point, which is, I think Peter will agree with this. When I first came to Russia, the thing you always used to hear people say is, we would want to live in a normal country. That our country isn't normal, and we want to live in a normal country. You never hear that people say that anymore in Russia, because the country is now so normal. And that is something which is going to continue. And of course, that normality will, I think, extend to more, as I said, vibrant politics, possibly. But you're not going to see a radical change. And I think people in Washington who think this is going to happen are going to be disappointed.
Just keep in mind, I mean, the 1990s was such a trauma for Russia. I mean, unbelievable trauma. And to this day, I think it's fair to say that people think of politics as something dirty and conniving. Okay, they just want the job done and get it done. And if you want to squabble among yourselves, fine. We're not interested. We're not.
You just you had to have seen the 90s in Russia to realize how abnormal and mad they actually were.
Simply mad. It was mad.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. Warezone123 said Trump should do himself a favor and watch the Duran. Yes. Tweet to Trump and tell him to tune in and send us a question next time on the live chat. And Peter and Alexander will try to answer it as best they can. Guys, we're approaching on 2 hours. and we will be wrapping it up in about 5-10 minutes. We'll take a couple of more questions. Don't forget, send us a super chat, donate to our Patreon and PayPal as well, so we can continue to broadcast. For you guys, a question on Putin, another question on Putin as we're wrapping it up is, what do you think Putin will do in retirement? Alexander.
Write his memoirs. I'm sure that's what one thing he will do. Enjoy his time off. I mean, he once said that he'd worked like a galley slave, and believe me, this man has worked incredibly hard. I mean, I'm sure he'll be interested in lots of things. He's got all sorts of things that do interest him. He's actually quite a well-read man, by the way. If you read him carefully, he reads lots of history. So I think he will enjoy his retirement, and I don't think that he will be any kind of shadow shogun figure controlling things behind the scenes. I mean, Russia doesn't work like that either.
However, I would say I agree with Alexander Mercouris. Yes. However, I think there's a caveat here. Yeah. I think anyone that replaces him is going to think, what would Putin think?
Oh, I think that's absolutely. I mean,
I think that's a positive thing. Okay,
I mean, he is absolutely. I mean, he is the towering figure of Russian politics. There is not, whoever comes after him is not going to be of the same stature. It is impossible. I mean, if for no other reason, because we won't have to overcome the kind of scale of challenges that he did.
Yeah.
So he will remain this towering presence. But as I said, it'll be a bit like Churchill in retirement.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, go on.
It's very interesting.
Yeah,
and I think it was very conscious here. Mikhail Gorbachev is intensely unpopular here, very unpopular for how he ended the Soviet Union, the way he did it. But the position, Putin's position, unsaid position, I would say, is that he's a former leader and give him respect.
Yes.
Boris Yeltsin, when he left power, was unpopular. Well, geez, what word would you use? Okay, I mean, wow. Again, you treat him with kid gloves. You treat him with respect in retirement. You know, people can say what they want, and when you mention Yeltsin's name, people will give you an earful. Okay, but Putin has never said anything disparagingly, even though he disagreed. And why am I saying this? Is because he wants to create a tradition. When you've done your service, however people feel about you, you move off the stage and you do it with dignity. And I think that's, look what happened in Russian and Soviet history, okay? They don't want to repeat that, okay? No. So it's creating a new tradition here, and I think it's a very smart tradition to pursue.
All right, the last question, Vinod Vasan. You sent us the first question before we started the live chat, so we'll finish off. You'll be the last question. And I'll let Alexander close it out, since this one is about what you think of Yanis Varoufakis and the Democracy in Europe movement.
Right. Well, Varoufakis.
I'm glad you got that question.
The interesting thing about Varoufakis, well, at least for me, is that he and I are supposed to have gone to school together. We were apparently in the same class in our Greek school, but then I left very young, and I have no memory of him at all. So, but anyway, I've been asked many times what I think of Varoufakis. Varoufakis is a brilliant economist. He was a disastrously bad finance minister. He is an appalling diplomat, and his analysis of European politics, I'm afraid, is completely naive. So whilst he understands, I think, a lot of the things that are wrong with the European Union, I think that his idea that he can be reformed in the way that he's talking about is just totally unrealistic. And I think even by discussing reform in the way that he is doing, he is, I'm afraid, creating confusion where there should be clarity and an understanding, a political understanding, that what we need is not reform of this institution, but rather its entire dismantling. That is what I think about him, and that's what I know a lot of other people think. I mean, I think people in Greece to this day still haven't realized what a bad finance minister he was. Not that because he's not a good economist, he's a good economist, but I mean, the way he negotiated things with the people on the Eurogroup was a total disaster.
Yeah, he was fun to watch in Europe.
He was fun to watch, exactly.
Peter, I'm not going to let you go that easily, because here's the last question. How does Peter keep his sanity given the crazy news he has to deal with on a daily basis? And we're going to close it out after you answer how you keep your sanity.
Good friends I can vent to in private and know that they're not going to be leaked by anonymous sources. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to sound kind of sentimental or anything, but I think in the West, we've developed principles that are worth fighting for, and I don't give up on them easily. I'm not going to be cowed by crowds yelling and screaming at me. I can take it because I'm a sovereign individual. I'm a unique person, and I'm not going to be buttonholed. I'm not going to be put in a box and labeled and put aside because of where I was born, what I look like, my gender. I'm not going to give in to these people. That this is totalitarianism. It's coming, and if you don't fight back, you're just going to have to shut up and nod your head. I don't want to live in that future, and I'm going to do everything I can in my power to avoid it.
Great answer. Alexander, how do you keep your sanity?
Well, some of the things that Peter said, but I mean, I think humor plays a part, actually, which is that
only conservatives are funny now. The left doesn't even laugh anymore.
I know.
They have no humor.
I know so much of what one hears is so absurd and so ridiculous that, I mean, one has to laugh. I mean, sometimes one has to cry also, because, I mean, God knows it had the most terrible consequences. But I mean, you know, one needs to keep a sense of the absurd. And, well, I suppose to some extent I do, because I mean, that's one of the things that keeps me going. I mean, sometimes I see things and I just shake my head and I say, how is this possible? And then you know, I say it can't get worse than this, and of course it invariably does. But
I think Dmitry Babich, our good friend,
yeah,
like every Sunday after our recording, we go out to dinner, and he is such a wonderful guy. And we were talking about, you know, surviving in the Soviet Union, what it was like, and he just said, well, we just had a really good laugh about the absurdity of so many things. That's what kept us going. I thought it was a great answer.
And on that note, we'll stop the live chat there, guys. Real quick, Peter, are you a fan of Kanye West?
Yes, of course. Of course. He speaks his mind. He's a sovereign individual. He has a right to speak his mind.
All right. We'll end it on that note. Guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for joining in on the live chat and for watching us. Alexander Mercouris in London, editor-in-chief of Duran. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. And I am Alex Christoforou in Moscow today as well. Guys, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all your questions. And thank you very, very much for the super chats as well. And remember, pick up a t-shirt.
T-shirt.
Donate to the Duran via PayPal or Patreon as well. And we really appreciate all your support. Thank you very, very much, guys. And I hope everyone has a great Sunday, whatever time of day it is, because we have people in Turkey, Australia, Hawaii, the US, Canada. Thank you for joining us in the UK. Thank you, guys. Alexander, Peter, any things you want to say?
Till next week.
Till next week. Great speaking, getting your questions. We want more of them.
All right. And tune in for the videos. We have a lot more videos coming. And of course, we're going to have another great news cycle because it just doesn't end.
No.
All right. Thank you guys very much. Take care, everybody.